Bangladesh is currently breaking export records and lifting millions out of poverty. Yet its national savings account is vanishing at a rate usually reserved for wartime collapses. The economy is hitting its targets and reaching a dead stop at the same time. By late 2021, the miracle was in full swing. The garment sector was shipping out tens of billions of dollars in apparel, while millions of workers abroad sent home a constant stream of cash remittances. This chart shows the country's gross foreign exchange reserves, the US dollars used to pay for every gallon of fuel and grain of imported wheat. In August 2021, the vault held $48 billion. By 2024, that number sat at roughly $35 billion. The situation is tighter than the official headlines suggest. International auditors use a standard called BPM-6 to calculate how much foreign currency a country actually has available to spend right now. By that measure, the usable cash is closer to $20 billion, barely enough to cover 4 months of imports. Facing the prospect of empty coffers, officials in Dhaka looked toward Washington and called the International Monetary Fund. Bangladesh secured a $4.7 billion rescue package. But we have to determine if this money saved the national miracle or if the government just traded away its ability to make its own economic choices. Record-high exports and remittances should have created a massive surplus. Instead, the central bank's vault was drained by 4 specific systemic failures. The first leak was a global energy shock. When the war in Ukraine began in 2022, global oil prices jumped 60%, and natural gas costs reached levels the world hadn't seen in decades. Bangladesh relies on imports for nearly all its power. To keep the lights on, the government had to spend drastically more dollars to fill these tanks with the same amount of fuel. Then came a massive post-pandemic import surge as local businesses rushed to restock. To stop the local currency, the taka, from losing value against the dollar, the central bank spent billions more from its reserves to artificially support the exchange rate. The final leak is the Hundi market, an informal shadow banking network where workers abroad send money home through unofficial channels. These dollars stayed outside the formal economy, leaving the central banks starving for cash, while money flowed directly into the local black market. The crisis proved the Bangladeshi economic engine was designed to run only during years of cheap energy and stable global trade. The IMF functions as a strict financial auditor. They don't just provide a loan, they demand total control over a country's spending habits. The first conditions were non-negotiable. Bangladesh had to stop fixing the taka's value and let the market decide the rate. Next, the government had to slash public subsidies on fuel and electricity, services that millions of people rely on for survival. They also demanded a cleanup of the banking sector. This meant the government had to finally confront powerful business elites who were holding billions of dollars in unpaid, bad loans. These policies look clean on a spreadsheet, but they translate to immediate pain. Electricity prices rose 50% in less than 2 years, and inflation on basic groceries hit double digits. This kind of sudden austerity creates intense social friction. Families who were recently moving into the middle class suddenly found themselves struggling to pay for basic utilities. The IMF solution shifted the burden of fixing the economy directly onto the people who were already under the most pressure. This is the core of the debate. Critics argue that forcing a developing nation into austerity suppresses local demand and keeps them reliant on debt rather than fostering real growth. We saw the alternative in Sri Lanka. When their reserves fell below $1.5 billion, the entire country seized up. Running out of dollars is humiliating for a nation. It results in mandatory rationing, where citizens spend days in line just to get a ticket for a few gallons of fuel. Supporters of the deal argue this was the only way to force Dhaka to fix decades of corruption and tax mismanagement. They see the IMF as a necessary tough love to save the country from itself. Bangladesh is currently in a better position than its neighbors because its industrial heart is still beating. Export containers are moving through this port every day, generating the very cash needed to pay the IMF back. The real test isn't just surviving the next year. It's rebuilding the entire economic machine while it's still running at full speed. There are 170 million people in these streets who have already absorbed the cost of these reforms through higher prices and lower subsidies. The question is whether Bangladesh will emerge as a diversified power with stronger institutions, or if it will remain a client state of international lenders. we have to consider the long-term impact of these conditions on the developing world and who actually benefits when the IMF steps in. The IMF provided the rescue Bangladesh needed, but in exchange, it took a seat at the table where the country's most important economic decisions are made.